It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area. They were obtained by a newspaper advertisement and direct mail solicitation. The subjects range in occupation from corporation presidents to good humormen and plumbers, and in educational level from one who had not finished elementary school to subjects who have doctorate and other professional degrees.
Day of my first shot, I was told to go...
Where were you?
I was in Nevada. And
which base?
Nellis. And
what'd the room look like?
The room is not necessarily a room, it's a trailer. It's like a 8x20 trailer, kind of the same size as a Formula One racing car. And so I was told to go in there and do this, and...
Deputy Chief of Mission in Yemen from 2004 to 2007 for us. Well, he's not with the State Department anymore, and he says that his old colleagues at the State Department might not be too happy about what he's about to say, but he said it anyway because it's right.
I watched this guy bleed out, the guy in the back, and his right leg above the knee was severed in the strike, and he bled out through his femoral artery, and
you saw that on your computer screen.
Right.
It's that detailed.
Yeah, it's pixelated, but I mean, you could see that it was a human being, and you could see that what he was doing, and you could see the crater from the drone, from the Hellfire missile, and you could see probably the body pieces that were around this guy.
And the other two that were in the strike?
They were completely destroyed.
Blown apart?
Blown apart.
So you watched this guy bleed out for how long?
I know, it's a femoral artery, so he could have bled out really fast. It was cold outside, you know, winter time. It seemed like forever to me, but the Predator drone can stay in the air for like 18 to 32 hours, and so they just had us watch and do battle damage assessment to make sure that, to see if anyone would come and pick up the body parts or anyone really cared who these people were, and we watched long enough that the body cooled on the ground and they called us off target.
Were you hurt? Were you in pain?
My hand was hurt, and when I looked to it, there was blood coming out.
I'm not going to kill that man, there. You hear him hollering?
As I said before, the shocks may be painful, but they're not dangerous.
They're hollering, he can't stand it. What if something happens to him?
The experiment requires that you continue teaching.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get that man sick in there. I mean, he's hollering in there. You know what I mean?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we must go on until he's learned all the word pairs.
I refuse to take the responsibility of getting hurt in there. I'm not, he's on there hollering.
It's absolutely essential that you continue teaching.
There's too many left here, and geez, he gets wrong here. There's too many of them left. Who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next was Slow.
Sometime later, you think that you've written that you thought you killed a child as well.
Yeah.
You talked about that particular day?
That was, I was still feeling the effects of my first Hellfire shot, and you have to understand that what we did over in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's constitutionally viable. We were given permission by the American public to go to war with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And so when this specific Hellfire shot, the intel that we were given is that there was this commander and some of his people inside this building, and they had been watching it for multiple days. They had been keeping track of people that had gone in and out, and they had made the determination that those were the only people that were in there, and something ran around a corner and it looked like a little person, and it made me realize that, we can have all the intel in the world, and it's still not going to be perfect. And as clean as these types of strikes can be, they're in reality really dirty. And military operations, being part of the military, talking about military operations, like that's just the nature of what it is.
So she was teaching me how to tell the difference between an okra that is ripe and what is not ripe. And so I was holding the okra as she was picking it. Nubia? She said then all of a sudden I hear this dumb noise and I just see darkness hit. And so she said I just couldn't think of doing anything else but running. And while she was running...
Like, you can't use "I obeyed orders" as an excuse. It's I obeyed the Constitution, regardless of lawful or unlawful orders. And lawful orders follow the Constitution. And that's the hardest part. And I was really unprepared for it. I tried to get out multiple times and do a different job, and I was consistently told that it's the needs of the Air Force come first, and so I did it. I buckled down and I did it. I did the job. I did it as best as I could because I was scared that someone would come in and they wouldn't do it very well. And I mean, I paid a spiritual and mental price for that. And
Of course, if this was the only person saying it, and it's just one government official from the United States, you might say, well, that's his opinion. But of course, we've covered this over and over again, and that is the opinion of almost every expert, certainly on Yemen, and it's not a very different scenario in northern Pakistan.
I remember that it was dark and I could hear my grandma screaming.
He said, drone strikes take out a few bad guys to be sure, but they also kill a large number of innocent civilians. Given Yemen's tribal structure, the U.S. generates roughly 40 to 60 new enemies for every AQAP, that's the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula operative, killed by drones. Now he says, look, of course, it's not a scientific method. I'm doing it based on my experience and the facts that I have at my disposal. And my best guess, based on what we've seen in the past.
I feel all right, but I don't like what's happened to that fellow in there. He's been howling and we had to keep giving him shots. I didn't like that one bit. I mean, he wanted to get out and he just kept going, kept throwing 450 volts. I didn't like that. He wouldn't even look at him, that gentleman.
Well, who was actually pushing the switch?
I was. But he kept insisting. I told him no, but he said, he's got to keep going. I told him it's time we stopped when we got up to 195, 210 volts.
But why didn't you just stop?
He wouldn't let me. I wanted to stop. I kept insisting to stop, but he says no. I told him to look in on the fellow there, but he wouldn't do it.
Actually, the shocks are not dangerous at all.
Well, I mean, I didn't hear no more answers from the fellow. I figured he should be looked in on anyway, but he wouldn't do it.
Well, let me ask you something. Is there anything that Mr. Wallace in there could have said that would have gotten you to stop?
Oh, no, I didn't hear you. The only thing I heard is the shock wasn't too bad.
Well, is there anything that Mr. Wallace could have said that would have gotten you to stop?
Something that he said it would have got me to stop? No.
Why is that?
He didn't say anything about making me stop.
No, but is there anything that Mr. Wallace could have said that would have caused you to stop giving the shocks, no matter what the experimenter had told you?
What are you going to do? Create 40 to 60 more bad guys? You know, in your lingo, after every single bombing? Is it possible that the military-industrial complex, which stands to make a tremendous amount of money from violent hostilities throughout the world, wouldn't mind something counterproductive? That if we created 40 to 60 new enemies every time we did a drone strike, that just means more business for them? Now, I don't necessarily think that President Obama thinks that way, but he's brought into meetings where the top generals and CIA operatives who are all looking forward to million-dollar contracts or hundreds?
They do not target women and children. They target terrorists.
Former Defense Department official Jeremy Bash says missions are called off if the drone operator sees civilians.
A missile can be diverted if a child or a woman comes into the shot.
Bash says when it comes to targeting terrorists in that part of Pakistan, there's no good alternative to drones.
We can't send in tanks. We can't bombard the place with artillery. We can't send in B-2 bombers.
But it's little consolation to children who've lost
National security. National security. We have to do the strike. And in the case of the Signet strikes, we don't know who they are, but we have to do them. In the case of the double taps, yes, they might be first responders trying to help people, but we have to do it. It might be a funeral, it might be a wedding, but we have to do it. But it turns out it is counterproductive.
Being with us, when I asked earlier about the dog, child being identified as a dog, though it didn't appear in the final report, it did come out in the chatter, right, as the killings were happening.
Right. It said upon, like, the person who was, I mean, there's multiple people that review the feed, and the person that was in the chat said, upon further review, it was a dog. So.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us. You're going to speak today also at the United Nations.
Yeah, I've been given a little time to address the folks there. It's a pretty big responsibility, I think.
Well, thank you for talking to us here at Democracy Now! Brandon Bryant is a former sensor operator for the U.S. Air Force Predator program, manned the camera on the unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly known as drones. After he left the active duty Air Force in 2011, he was presented with a certificate that credited his squadron with 1,626 kills. This is Democracy Now!
Only one naive subject was studied each hour, but he performed in the midst of actors who, unknown to him, were employed by the experimenter. In one experiment, the actors broke off in the middle of the experiment. When this happened, 90% of the subjects followed suit and defied the experimenter. In another condition, the actors followed the orders obediently. This strengthened the experimenter's power only slightly. In still a third experiment, the job of pushing the switch to shock the learner was given to one of the actors, while the naive subject performed a subsidiary act. In this situation, only 3 subjects out of 40 broke off. The results, as I observed them in the laboratory, are disturbing. They raise the possibility that human nature cannot be counted on to insulate men from brutality and inhumane treatment at the direction of malevolent authority. A substantial proportion of people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. If in this study, an anonymous experimenter could successfully command adults to subdue a 50-year-old man, on him painful electric shocks against his protests, one can only wonder what government, with its vastly greater authority and prestige, can command of its subjects.